Thanks, guys, for that. It's time now to welcome Mike Bowden-Distel, host of The Stockout and our CPG expert, to the show. Mike, thanks for joining us.
How are you?
Doing pretty good, pretty good. Let's dig right into today's conversation, talking a little bit about forecasting CPG using analytics. What are you excited about from this episode of The Stockout?
Yeah, so we've got a really great guest on. It's going to be KK Davey, who's the president of strategy and analytics at IRI. So IRI does data analytics firm, and they really, one of their specialties is the CPG industry. They do a lot in conjunction with the Boston Consulting Group, and you see their name come up a lot in things that are written about the CPG industry because they forecast what's going to take place in terms of sales volume, et cetera, in the industry. And there's a lot going on now in CPG, and you sort of have the question of sort of where do we go from here? I mean, most CPG sales for most companies are still at a level that's above pre-pandemic levels because of work from home phenomenon and other things. But now going forward, you have all this inflationary pressure. Most of the CPG companies have said the elasticity is no worse than usual, even with inflation at a 40-year high. I wonder if some of the companies start to walk that back going forward. And the volume of sales in this environment is maybe more critical than ever because so many of the CPG companies have had to outsource manufacturing to contract manufacturers, which is very expensive. It also complicates the supply chain because you have more inventory in more places, you need more carrier relationships, it just adds complexity that you don't want, costs you don't want. And so the companies are looking, going forward, do they want to bring more of that manufacturing capacity in-house and spend that capital, which may help on the margin, but then there's also a risk that those sales won't be there. So I think maybe now so more than ever, forecasting what's going to happen in terms of CPG sales is probably more critical, but it's also I'd say very difficult right now.
Yeah, very, very difficult. And I would imagine that there was a lot of difficulty in maintaining and managing the quality and integrity of product as you go to the outsourced manufacturers and the supply chain becomes more and more diverse. Does this company, is it IRI? Is that the name of the company that is?
IRI, yeah. IRI.
Yeah, okay. So when you talk about the I'm not familiar with them, when you talk about the packaging, forecasting, and designing it, et cetera, is it from an advertising or from a functionality or both perspective?
It's really they do a lot of different types of things, but I mean they will look at the CPG industry. One of the things they do is just for overall how quickly is the industry going to grow, and then they'll break that down by segment. And so in general, I mean they've talked about they think the CPG industry, at least some of the recent comments, is that it's going to stay above pre-pandemic levels because of the people working from home. It'd be interesting to see if those forecasts start to change a little bit, given the pressure that some of these companies are under to maintain margins.
Mike, a couple weeks ago when we chatted, you mentioned that CPG is an industry where even though we are seeing inflation kind of touch it, you're not going to see a ton of people now stopping buying these CPG goods. They may pivot more to a wholesale brand, or they might pivot to more of a store brand instead of these slightly expensive or more expensive name brands. A lot of that comes in branding and marketing as well. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of things?
Sure. So I did a show, last week for the Stockout that talked a lot about branding and packaging. Had on Fred Hart, who's the partner and creative director at Interact, which is a branding agency in Boulder, Colorado. And he's worked with a lot of CPG companies on their branding and their packaging. Has a lot of sort of unique ideas, and some of the trends there. Some of the advice he has is just don't blindly follow the trends. And even though, for example, aluminum cans taking a lot of share from the PET plastic bottles, a lot of consumers still want those plastic bottles. And he also has a lot of good advice in sort of not NASCARizing the packaging, sort of stick to one or two things that this brand really wants to be known for, that it does well, and don't overwhelm the consumer with labels. I mean, a lot of the CPG brands that have launched recently have been started as direct-to-consumer brands over the internet They've, gotten sort of a dedicated fan base that they've acquired from advertising on places like YouTube and advertising on podcasts. And, when they make the transition to the store, it's this challenge of, now you're trying to speak to an audience who just doesn't care as much, and usually buys another product habitually. And so you have to find a way to have these conquest sales against the established player. And a lot of times that means packaging that is flashier, that sort of really gets the point across, that makes it look like this is not something that's, was started by Procter and Gamble or Unilever. This is sort of a unique, brand that is doing something different. So there's a lot that goes into the packaging and branding. I think it's interesting because of the direct to consumer phenomenon.
Mike, that point's really interesting to me as well. When you think about it going the other way, these brands who maybe started as an in-store brand to be really just kind of bought in-store and then grow themselves that way, now looking at trying to take up some of that market share on the online model, are they facing the same struggles to kind of cater to that younger audience and thinking like, okay, we really have to beef up our online presence? Like I'm thinking of like the Wendy's of the world, right? Who, not necessarily CPG, but they go on Twitter, they try to be relatable, and they try to get people to accept their brand when they are traditionally not necessarily an online presence.
Yeah, I think it's a little harder to go that way, because you once you sort of have the reputation that this is not a cool brand, it's hard to go the other way. I mean, an example I see is with, the Smucker company owns Folgers, and Folgers is trying to be sort of the cool brand, and now even though it's sort of associated with people that are older, it'd be interesting. I think maybe what might work is just be the anti-artisan brand, saying, all you fancy people, we're not you, or sort of the gritty people. That might actually work. So it's interesting to see how some of these brands are doing this. But I mean, some of the larger brands that are doing more online. I mean, a lot of that's going through the retailer. A lot of people are as you guys know, I mean, buying groceries and those items for convenience. So it seems like when it's a large brand doing the direct to consumer, it's more for convenience. When it's a smaller brand, it's because it just finds a way to get sort of their foot in the door and grow that way in a manner where you don't have to deal with Walmart right away.
I also feel like a lot of those established older CPG brands typically leverage television commercials as well for their branding and their marketing. And as we know, the younger audience isn't a TV generation. I haven't had cable the entirety of my adult life. I know a lot of my friends who have never had cable as well. And then you kind of have to pivot now your advertising strategy to cater to that as well. Are you seeing, or do you see any type of trend in kind of spend for these CPG companies moving their advertising away from traditional cable TV ads and into more of an online branding ad presence?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's some companies that were, 80% TV and now they're 40 or 50% TV. I mean, they're still doing a lot on TV. And then there's another trend I've seen is a lot of companies that have had issues with stockouts and not having the products on the shelves. Those companies have really pulled back a lot on advertising. They figured, well, if we're just going to run out if we create demand by advertising, the may as well not advertise. So that's been one way they've managed the demand. Actually, has been by pulling back on the marketing spend, and the marketing spend is discretionary. I mean, it's one way where all their costs are inflating. Ingredient prices are way up. Ingredients are about half of the cost of sales for a CPG company. They don't have as much control over those things aside from what hedges are in place, right? So, but with marketing, I mean, that's pretty discretionary. So it's been one lever that they've been pulling and experimenting with to see if they can maintain the sales while pulling back on the marketing spend.
Yeah, I suspect it'll change dramatically as we move forward. There'll be more marketing and the metaverse and the games, et cetera. I mean, hey, my kids, it's incredibly rare if they're watching TV.
Yeah.
Incredibly rare. Even cable or even on a Hulu or anything like that. Incredibly rare. So that change in marketing has got to be coming.
All right, Mike.
And it can be very targeted too. Is the other thing is
yes.
Like, like a company like a Dollar Shave Club, which started as a DTC brand. I mean, they had their market, they knew who it was and, got very specific on, who was listening to certain shows online.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right, Mike, thank you for being here with us today. It was great to have you. We'll catch up with you later today on For the Stock Out. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with another full hour of FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.